Yeah, so maybe we will get started now. It is just about noon. And I would like to extend a warm welcome to everybody on this call today. I believe we have community members, students, staff, and faculty from several groups and universities in the audience. And thank you all so much for coming. I believe everybody is probably very familiar with Zoom etiquette these days, but if you could please remember to mute yourself when you're not speaking. And if you would like to ask a question for our presenters, which we really hope you will, please put that question into the chat at any time. And then we will pose these questions to the speakers at the end of the presentation. And if you are a student in ESS and would like to receive seminar credit, please make sure that your first and last name are showing in your screen box so Caitlin can figure out who you are. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Iris Stewart-Fry, and I'm a faculty member in the Department of Environmental Studies and Sciences and a co-facilitator of the Environmental Justice and the Common Good Initiative, both at Santa Clara University. These two organizations are co-sponsoring the seminar today. Before we get started, I would like us to pause for a moment and acknowledge that Santa Clara University occupies the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ohlone and Muwekma Ohlone people. Today, it is my very great pleasure to welcome our presenters who will be speaking on long-term tribal partnerships in the Klamath Basin, advancing Karuk sovereignty and self-determination through water quality. With us are Ron Reed, Susan Fricke, and Sibyl Diver. I know that the presenters will talk more extensively about their role in the work within their presentation, so I just want to give a brief introduction of each of them here. Ron is a traditional Karuk dipnet fisherman, spiritual leader, and former cultural biologist in the Karuk Tribe. He comes from a long and prominent family of traditional spiritual leaders and cultural practitioners, and he has been instrumental in the cultural and ecological restoration efforts to remove 4 large dams on the Klamath River. Susan Fricke is the Water Quality Program Manager for the Karuk Tribe Department of Natural Resources. She has a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Kansas State University and a Master of Science in Natural Resources Fisheries from Humboldt State University. Susan has worked in natural resources monitoring, research, and management for 20 years. Sibyl Diver is a research scientist at Stanford University in the Department of Earth Systems Science. She does community-engaged research on indigenous water governance, focusing on Pacific Northwest salmon watersheds. This includes research on co-management for collaborative management, arrangements between indigenous communities and state agencies. She received her PhD from Berkeley's Department of Environmental Science, Policy and Management. Sibyl is a member of the Karuk UC Berkeley Collaborative, a group supporting the Karuk Tribe's ecocultural revitalization strategy in Northern California. And before we get started, I have one more introductory slide for those of us who are not familiar with the Klamath watershed, maybe particularly the students on the call. The Klamath watershed lies partly in southern Oregon and partly in Northern California. The boundary goes like right around here. It is divided into the upper watershed, which is cut off from the lower watershed, which is over here, through a series of 4 dams, which lie right around here. The red dot. Water is withdrawn for the irrigation in the upper watershed, so there's a lot less water going to the lower watershed, and the lower watershed is more remote and more mountainous, and it is in the lower watershed where the traditional homelands of the Karuk, the Yurok, and Hupa lie. And with this, I would like to unshare my screen and pass the microphone to the presenters. And so Sibyl, Ron, and Susan, please take it away.
Right. Thank you. Let's see. How's that? What can people see the slides?
Looks great.
All right.
Yep, that's great.
Good. Well, it is a real delight to be here and to see friends. And so thank you so much, Iris, for the invitation to be here today. Hold on, I'm going to get us back to the beginning. And also thank you to the Environmental Justice and Common Good Initiative at Santa Clara University and the Department of Environmental Sciences for hosting, and also to colleagues from the Network of Community Academic Partnerships for Environmental Justice who may be here. So I'll also start by acknowledging the traditional territory of Mwakma people where I live and work, of Indigenous peoples in the lands where you come from. I recognize the role our universities have played in displacing and exploiting Indigenous peoples, but also recognize the continuing presence and leaderships of tribes like the Karuk and others, which is really creating the opportunity for us to work in solidarity towards reparations and restoration and a more just future, which is part of what brings us all here today. So welcome. Again, my name is Sibyl Diver here, and I'm delighted to be able to present with my friends and colleagues, Ron Reed and Susan Fricke, to share our presentation. And it's just a wonderful opportunity. We were talking before the group got on the call at how the chance to be together really allows us to reflect on our experiences working together over the past 10 years. And I want to say a personal thank you to Susan and Ron for taking time away from their responsibilities for being here. And especially Ron, I've learned so much from you and your family since we first met. So thanks again for all of your work and your mentorship and for being here. So I'll just start us off. So Ron, earlier this week, we were talking about how this work on water quality is really the culmination of many years of work for you. Do you want to start us off talking about this slide, this photo, and a little bit about your approach? And then you can share some more about your family history. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Sibyl. Thank you very much, Iris, and all the kind words been said today. First of all, thank you very much, Susan and Sibyl. You guys are my heroes because, you know, without you folks and being able to illuminate the issues in Indigenous science in relationship to Western science, I would be somewhere else right now. So I want to thank you very much in that acknowledgement. This picture right here is basically accumulation of a lot of my work. You know, the social media has been a platform, and that platform has allowed the infusion of Indigenous science and Western science to come together as a common goal science. And so therefore, the work that we do is cutting edge, and it needs to be articulated in a way, in such a way that science is the catalyst. And, you know, and I think that's the relationship that's been built, and that's the relationship that we're relying on marching into the future.
Thanks, Ron. I'm going to move us to the next slide.
So this is a picture of my great-grandmother. I come from a very traditional family, and my grandfather's side, my great-grandfather's side, I'm a medicine man. The medicine man ran through his lineage. On my great-grandmother's side, she was a medicine doctor. The interconnectedness between the people, the plants and animals, the great creator, landscape. No. My battery's running low, it says. Wow.
All right.
But anyway, I'm very proud to be a part of this process. I have my picture of my great grandmother here because we are from a matriarchal society. My mother is a medicine woman as well. So my spiritual teachings have came from the matriarchal side and from this lady in particular who trained my mother. So thank you.
Thanks, Ron. And just, we're going to be flexible today about the technology. So if you need to take a minute and plug in, I should let people know also Ron's power has been out for 3 days because he's on the Klamath. So we're especially glad for this timing. So I'll pass it to
I'm going to talk for a minute too, Ron. So if you need to troubleshoot, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm passing to Susan. Go for it.
Yep. So hi, I'm Susan Fricke or Fricke auf Deutsch. I haven't heard that for a few years. Thank you, Iris. And I've worked for the Karuk Tribe since 2005. I originally started in Kansas City and came to the West Coast in 2002 to pursue a master's degree in fisheries at Humboldt State University. And then I had the fortunate luck to be able to get this amazing job doing watershed ecology work, working for the tribe. What we try to do there is not just do single species management, but respect traditional knowledge and use tribally collected data to integrate that into Western science. And not only that, but also policy, laws, litigation, all those kind of things. We use all the tools to get the tribal knowledge and the tribal science incorporated into that. Our water quality program collects and monitors and does research on over 140 miles of river. We're the only water quality monitoring entity in the Mid-Klamath River, which I think is a very great thing to have tribally led science in that part of the area. If we had the feds or states coming to work, they'd have to drive 2 hours just to get to our office. So it's benefits on multiple levels for this, that we're the ones who lead these programs. So let's see, what else are we doing? So what you can see here is one of our big campaigns that we work on and research projects we work on is harmful algal blooms. And then we also work with Nora, who happens to be on the phone today as well on the Zoom call. We work with great collaboratives with different universities, NGOs, state and federal agencies, and other tribes. Because when you're working in watersheds as large as these, when Iris showed the beginning, the Klamath Basin crosses 2 states. It's a huge land base, and everything that happens above the Karuk Aboriginal territory impacts what flows into and through the Aboriginal territory. So we have to work with all these different organizations and agencies and tribes to help manage the watershed in a way that makes it good for people like Ron to be able to go out and do fishing and ceremonial practice. Next slide, Sibyl. So here's one of the things that we're really proud of. Because we host on our website, we have also the Klamath Tribe's site that's near the mouth. So we have over 190 miles of river data is available real time. We monitor along the main stem of the Klamath River, but also at the mouths of the major tributaries, including the Salmon, the Scott, and the Shasta. So on a given day, we have folks, again, from this huge collaborative network of people who will go onto our website and look at our data to see what the water temperature is. In the wintertime, we track turbidity. In the summertime, we have a phycocyanin probe, which can track your blue-green algae blooms or those harmful algal blooms. So this is a really good way to display our data and to let people be able to use it to make real-time monitoring and management decisions. Next slide.
Great. Thanks, Susan. So I'll jump in now and share a little bit about how I got involved. I actually first learned about the interconnections between Indigenous rights and resource management and salmon protection about 20 years ago. I was working for an NGO and in the capacity of a translator, facilitator, and through doing Russian Indigenous capacity building and exchanges in the Pacific Northwest, linking our Russian colleagues with their counterparts in Washington and Oregon, my eyes were really opened to a lot of these issues for the first time. And that led me to go back to school at UC Berkeley, where I did my doctorate degree in environmental science policy and management. And, I'm now at Stanford and working in our Earth Systems program. But at that time at Berkeley, that was when I really first met Ron and Susan, and and I was introduced to Ron because some of my colleagues and friends, Jennifer Sauerwein, Tom Carlson, had met with Ron, and we're building this collaboration between the Karuk Tribe and the university to really build synergistic initiatives for ecocultural revitalization and to mobilize some of the university-based resources and expertise to support the research questions that the tribe wanted to ask. And it was really those years of getting to know you, Ron and Susan, and your families that really helped change my way of thinking about Indigenous land and watershed management and research also. And this is a photo of us, a blast from the past in 2009, getting together at the back table and when we were putting together the Karuk Land Management Historical Timeline, which provides a nice context, I think, for this talk. And also context for how we built this partnership. So I remember coming up to the river with this plan that we would meet with you guys for about 2 hours, so as not to take too much of your time. But it ended up that we spent a whole day together. And Ron, I think you organized the cultural resource training for us and a salmon dinner, and we picked huckleberries, and we just had deep discussion all along the way. And so, Ron, do you want to talk a little bit about the significance of this event for you?
Yes, thanks, Sibyl. And that's amazing. I mean, this is a very mysterious time for the tribe. You know, this is when Berkeley was just seen as a kind of a somebody that wasn't a good, the institution wasn't renowned for being good to the tribes. You know, so it was a very mysterious time. But we broke through that, and what we was able to do. It was the first time that a prestigious academic institution come in to Karuk country, acknowledging Indigenous science and enthusiastic about fusing Western science and Indigenous science, so we can kind of come up with a common ground approach. And in the modern management paradigm, is very important to be able to get tribal community involved, and because this is a very important time because it included tribal government, federal government, which is federal government, tribal government, academic institutions, tribal community, and the youth. You know, so I think that was very important. The cultural practitioners, for the first time in Karuk country, we're at the table, shoulder to shoulder with folks, and being able to express our knowledge in an Indigenous science way, to be acknowledged and put down and be incorporated into modern management paradigm.
Thank you, Ron. Yeah, so you know, just to briefly also introduce this timeline and how we use this to start our academic community collaboration. The timeline was really this 15-foot artistic display of Karuk land management history from 1850 onward. And it turned out that learning the history with you, so learning it together, was a really good way to start the partnership. And it was a way for me and some of the other Berkeley students that were coming up to the river. We'd never been there. We were nervous. We didn't know anybody. And this was a chance for us to really start building relationships with people like Ron and Susan, and also a relationship with the place. And you can see the youth artwork here that teachers helped us to include as a way to really emphasize the place-based relationships that are central to all the work that we do. And so I'm really proud of this moment for bringing us all together. But I'll add that the timeline was also a very important community research contribution, because the data entries linked federal and state policy decisions and land management actions that have led to community health impacts. And what we did is there's so much knowledge in the community, and we just used the timeline as a scaffold to really organize both community knowledge and knowledge in the literature and white papers, all of this information, so you could begin to see patterns of systemic racism, particularly how the dispossession of Karuk lands and land management practices like fishing and cultural burning occurred, and how they are embedded within land management institutions and practices still today. And so we really we really lean on the timeline to help organize some of these patterns for us. But the timeline also really demonstrated the community response to the inequities, tribal resistance, resilience, and self-determination every step of the way. So it allows some simultaneity. We can see both. So I'll turn it over to Ron if you want to comment on the social importance of this project.
Thank you again, Sibyl. What I view this document as, or this slide, is a historical roadmap. It's for the first, because the history of the California Indians, history of Native Americans across this great country, the story hasn't been told properly. And so growing up, you hear about the Sioux, you hear about all these different tribes, and we don't know exactly what happened in our backyard. So this is the first attempt that I know of that we chronologically put these different processes in order so we can see the legislation that took place. And then so this is more important for our tribal community because this allows us to put, our great grandparents lived in this era. This is what was going on in America at that time. So this is the first time in my life that I was able to kind of like put my grandparents, my great grandparents in a time frame, on a timeline, to be able to say, so now I see my mother, was, born in the Depression and all these different things happened. And before that, my grandfather was born at the beginning of 1898. So that kind of allows me to figure out the social implications that occurred during that time, which leads to intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, et cetera, that affects our community and plagues it today.
Thank you, Ron. It's really important. So I'll add one more thing, that as a community-based researcher, another thing that was really critical for us was to just have that time to be physically present on Karuk ancestral territory. It changed how we thought about the project, and it changed the project itself. And to give other people a sense of where we are, I'll share this map. So you can see, this is piggybacking on Iris as our wonderful hydrologist and GIS person. This is from the Karuk Department of Natural Resources, and it shows ancestral territory for the Karuk tribe that extends, as Susan mentioned, between two states from California up to Oregon, and it crosses multiple counties and several U.S. forest districts that are all governed separately. And so this creates a highly multi-jurisdictional management environment that will inform some of the research that we're doing later. But Ron, I'll turn it over to you now to talk a little bit more on the colonial history.
Yes, I got to be frank with you. Forced assimilation, that's cultural genocide. No, that's genocide. And that's what we, as a nation of people, went through. Although we're a federally recognized tribe, we have no land base. We're the second largest tribe in California that has the dubious distinction of being one of 18 tribes in California without a ratified treaty. That means that we gave up 1.4 million acres of ancestral territory for a treaty and a reservation that was never ratified by Congress. And you can see in the pink illustrated in the picture, you see the pink land base that we have right now. And that's, I'm very proud of that the tribe has kind of like developed that type of ability to acquire that kind of land. But in a sense, that's not allowed us to be to practice subsistence lifestyle. But because we have a ratified treaty, that means that the federal government has to coordinate with the tribe to be able to do work in our land. So we do have some say, and allows for that ancestral territory to be utilized by the tribe for subsistence purposes.
Thank you, Ron. Turn it over to Susan to move us into the dam removal discussion. Oh, Susan, we can't hear you quite yet.
It might help if I unmute, sorry. As Iris pointed out, we do have a series of dams that are owned by, now they're owned by PacifiCorp, but there's some utility dams for hydroelectric power that block over 350 miles of fish passage on the Klamath River. So what the history for how we got involved in this is in 2001, the water wars started, where they started withholding diversions and withholding water to come down through the lower part of the river. And these flows help feed the water, they feed the river for the fall Chinook salmon, which are fished for subsistence fishing by Ron and his family and other Karuk tribal members, and Yurok tribe as well. So that was a concern. And then in 2002, when they cut back the water, we had over 70,000 adult Chinook died. And this was the start of a lot of attention towards the Klamath River. And through this, we started working. Also, what was occurring at the same time was the Fricke relicensing process. That's a process where the dams have to be relicensed. And of course, there's many different organizations felt that the dams should not be relicensed and they should be removed because it was less than 2% of the power is what these dams were providing. And they were causing all these huge catastrophic effects. We've had the failure of the fishery. There's water quality impacts. There's cultural impacts that Ron talks about. So many things. So Ron started to get involved in this, and he started to attend meetings about this Fricke licensing. Ron, would you like to continue?
Sure. Those Fricke meetings encompass going to these meetings 1 week every month for 5 years. I mean, that 1 week every month for 5 years. At the end of that process, they deemed that there's no cultural impact below the project area, which was the dams. And as you see in the picture off to the left there, in 2002, that was the second year of the Fricke relicensing process. And we told them that you give water to agriculture in this water year, that dead fish will be lying along the banks. And the tribes, again, were very prophetic in a very unnatural way this time. And so that's what occurred there. And then, then we went around the world. I mean, what can we do to kind of express our anger, our disgust, our, whatever the emotions that we're going through? And we had to go and actually rally at the owners of the dams, first over to Scotland, then over Brookshire, Hathaway's place over in Nebraska. So we're really, we went around the world and then right back into our same country to advocate for our relations, the salmon and the river that they run in.
Thank you, Ron. So this is really amazing organizing that you did at that time. And I'll introduce briefly one of the academic community collaboration that was part of the tribal response. Because as you were hearing, this is an all too common situation where Indigenous communities like the Karuk may be invited to the table, but Indigenous knowledge was, in this case, not brought into the decision-making process. So this is the Altered Diet Report where, Ron, you were teaming up with allied researcher Kari Norgard, now at Oregon, to lay out the data and really link the disproportionate levels of diet-related disease and being experienced by Karuk people to the loss of traditional foods like salmon that are caused in part from this dam construction. And I know this was a really important moment for Indigenous-led science and in a knowledge translation moment. Ron, will you talk more about the significance of this and what happened after this was covered in the Washington Post?
Yes, thank you. The most important piece or the most important fact about this document is that it's a scientifically valid document. The Fricke relicensing process said that all the different accusations in this document had to be answered by Pacificor, the owner of the dams. So that really put a big strain on Western science. Western science was ruling the way. They kind of disregarded everything I said about our cultural values, the cultural impacts, the social impacts, everything I had to say at those meetings for those 5 years were disregarded. But once this document came out as scientifically valid process, then I felt like at that point, the world shifted. The world of anecdotal information became traditional ecological knowledge. And it wasn't because Native Americans or even this document. From my perspective, and it may be mine alone, that I believe that the reason why traditional ecological knowledge became a management component is because of the agriculture in the upper basin were claiming the same knowledge. They had knowledge of their watershed, and we acknowledge that. They know how to move water. They know what water about water up there more than anybody. But at the same time, we know about the lower basin more than anybody. So at that point, was able to kind of like, it surfaced, indigenous science surfaced, and has been being validated by Western science. It started at that point, and it has continued today. So I feel like it's been the catalyst of indigenous science as we move forward in the modern management paradigm, regardless of its water, if it's landscape, and also I believe also with our with the mental health of our people as well.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for that work. Susan, I'll turn it over to you to talk about cultural beneficial uses.
Here's another example of where we took what Ron was talking about with the cultural knowledge, and with the help of others, we translated it into the Western science, because the cultural knowledge, as he said, was not being respected through these state and federal processes. So we needed to translate it into a way that they would use this to develop good plans for management actions. So here's an example of a cultural beneficial use. At the time, we were under a consent decree to develop these things called total maximum daily loads. And they're a process under the Clean Water Act, and where you pretty much look at a watershed and you say, here are the things that they are polluted for, and then here's the way we're going to fix them. And there's an implementation plan. For example, like water, temperature, dissolved oxygen, nutrient loading, mercury, things like that are ones you guys might have heard of. So when they were looking at ways to develop the TMDLs, or the total maximum daily loads, one of the most common things to look at in the area where we are, and through pretty much like Northern California up through the Pacific Northwest, is salmon, because they are the most sensitive species. Well, when you're dealing in tribal lands, salmon aren't the only thing that we need to consider, and salmon don't have the same requirements as humans do who want to use that water. So they say, okay, that's great. You want to use for your ceremonies, you have their world renewal ceremonies. So what, that's 2 weeks a year that you might need to use that water and have it clean. And so what we needed to show them was, no, when you have tribes and people that are using this water for so many different uses, for not only fishing, but for ceremonies, for basket materials, for collecting subsistence food, such as freshwater mussels, they need the water year round to be healthy. So that's what this table shows. This was a collaborative process between cultural practitioners Ron Reed and Vera Davis, and also working with Dr. Frank Lake. And what this table shows, as you can see, it's a little small to read, but it's so many different uses, and they are across the board. The river needs to be clean every month of the year for a variety of reasons. So this has been brought to the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. There's a cultural use that's adopted, and subsistence fishing that's adopted for Region 1, which is that North Coast region. And then we also took this and worked with other tribes across the state to get this developed and adopted statewide as well. And Ron, would you like to talk about how this table is important to you?
Thank you, but I'd first like to let everybody know, now you know why Susan's so important to me. She's able to frame these things so well, and these are things that come right from, I can't say this is my information. This is a tribal perspective. This has been passed down through generation to generation to generation. And it just so happens that I have an inherent responsibility through my bloodline to be able to address these issues. And if it wasn't for Frank Lake, Dr. Frank Lake, in the Western science capacity, but a well-known cultural practitioner and tribal member, and my mother, the one I talked about earlier. That's amazing set of knowledge institutions coming together and forming a document such as that drives modern management paradigm today. Again, my perspective, I have a strong one, and I believe that this document right here had a lot to do with the reason why the Klamath hydroelectric relicensing process went into settlement mode. How in the world could they make sure that the water quality would fit the TMDL standards in this capacity right here that we're looking at? So obviously they couldn't. And so now my big worry is all these issues that we're talking about, water quality, the time of year, and things like that, were not being addressed appropriately until the new news of the dams are coming out in 2023. So that addresses all these issues here. And so I feel like this is a very important document in a modern management paradigm that has reached back centuries with the knowledge that has been overlooked and been stripped from us. And now that's the same thing that I'm sending my children to go to school today to learn these things so that, that they can be that whole person without needing somebody else to articulate their vision or their level of person.
So here's another thing that we've been working on. As I mentioned earlier, we work on what's called blue-green algae or harmful algal blooms or toxic algae, however you want to call it. The Karuk Tribe started monitoring for harmful algal blooms in the project reach with these reservoirs in 2005. And what we found is that we had some of the highest levels in the world, and we still do within these reservoirs. So these blooms create a toxic algae called Microcystis aeruginosa, and it produces a liver toxin called microcystin. And the reason that these blooms are thriving so well in the Klamath River is because they love a big, warm, nutrient-rich bathtub. And so when you saw the way that the watershed was split, what's really interesting about the Klamath is it's actually referred to as a reverse watershed, where most watersheds are steep in the upper part and then they are lower, and you think of the ag lands closer to the mouth. This one is flat and wetlands and marsh that was diked and drained for agricultural use in the top part, and then it's the canyony steep part and the bottom part. So we have a lot of nutrients that come in from land management changes that happen in the upper basin, and they come into these big warm bathtubs, and where the water is not flowing and it's warming up because it's sitting there, and it creates these huge blooms. So this has been a concern. So we've been working collaboratively with folks to study this for about 15 years now. And this is a concern because it's a liver toxin. It's a concern not only for people who are rafting or recreating or swimming in the water, it's also a concern for wildlife can have effects from this, from fisheries, from all of those things. But the biggest concern that we have is that this flows through the Karuk Aboriginal territory at the worst time of the year. It's the time when Ron and his family and other ceremonial leaders are in the water for ceremonial purposes. So their river is being contaminated with these toxins right at the peak of their ceremonies, and they're trying to make the world right. Ron, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, basically that water, we're not going anywhere. We're a place-based religion. And that place-based religion dictates that on an annual basis, we have ritualistic ceremonies. And in those ceremonies is that, unfortunately, at that time of year is when we get the water that looks like that sometimes. And, and we're not moving away from that water. We still bathe. We, our practitioners or our medicine people are spiritually cleansing themselves. They're connected to the immortal. So that's kind of like a significant part of who we are and the ceremony itself. And so, Susan did a very good job of outlining all the different impacts of the tribal community, because this is a time of year when, when recreation on the river used to be at its highest, and now it's, it's altered considerably, so yeah.
Thanks to you both.
So the good news is after all this advocacy from Ron and all those meetings and hard work and persistence and diligence, everything that went into this huge collaborative group that has worked on this, we now have a new agreement between Berkshire Hathaway, which is the owner of the utility Pacificor, which is Berkshire Hathaway is owned by Warren Buffett, and the state of Oregon and the state of California to remove the dams in 2023. We had some setbacks and some agreements that have fallen apart and changed, but as of November of 2020, we have amazing news. And so what that will mean, so what we've talked about, is we're going to remove those big, large nutrient-rich bathtubs. We're going to change them back into a free-flowing river. So that's going to alleviate and reduce a lot of our water quality concerns that we have in the river. And it's also, like I said, going to open up over 350 miles of fish habitat. And it's going to start a process to start healing the world. Ron?
That was a very important time. I wasn't actually working with the tribe at that point, but you see just below Schwarzenegger there's a picture of the Ishipishi Falls there. I think my head might be just poking out there. So I was pretty proud of the fact that even when they signed this great document for dam removal, I was still present in the room, even though I was no longer working for the tribe. And I think that just, leads to the value of this relationship between these two knowledge institutions. I mean, we've been here forever. The Upper Basin has been there for a couple of generations, but academia have been around here for quite a while as well. But together, I think, through all the different resources we have, I believe that we are in the process of making the Klamath River one of the few rivers in the world that you can fix from the mouth of the river all the way up to the headwaters. And that is a monumental impact and effect, and I'm proud to be a part of that.
Thank you, Ron. I'm going to share this briefly because we're wanting to make sure we have time for questions, but huge congratulations to both of you for the agreement and the dam removal plan for 2023. And I know these are dams that don't provide very much hydroelectric power and provide no flood control benefits. So it's a big win in the situation. So I'll just share a few words to say that Ron and Susan and I are continuing to do research together. And this is a little bit about what we're doing on social network methods to really show some of the complexity behind tribal leadership and impact for water protection on the Klamath. So this is showing that from research that I did with Susan, that 5 tribal managers at the Karuk Tribe are connecting with 259 different organizations on water quality alone. So on the one hand, we're seeing the Karuk Tribe is right there at the center of these highly technical, multi-jurisdictional processes and self-representing themselves in the science and the policy. But on the other hand, Ron has shared with me, this is really looking like a jurisdictional nightmare, that 259 organizations you have to talk to, and yet you still want to be able to go fishing. So this really talks about the incredible labor that the tribe is putting into water quality governance, despite being under-resourced, and raises some questions about resource distribution. And this is another research project that we're starting on, looking at treatment as a state, which is something to celebrate as well. Susan has shared the Karuk Tribe just gained treatment as a state status this fall for creating tribal water quality standards under the Clean Water Act. So that means they can develop standards that are recognized and used through a co-governance arrangement with the EPA. And we're trying to learn more about, okay, how do other Pacific Northwest salmon tribes use their treatment as a state programs and share out those findings? And how does that connect back to cultural beneficial uses that we talked before? And I'll pass it now back to Ron, because Susan and I are really working in an allied position with the tribe on a lot of these science policy issues on the academic community partnership side, but really the underlying goal is to support tribal leadership. And Ron, I'll let you share close on your vision and goals here. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And it's been amazing. And this is a picture of our World Renewal, our white deerskin dance, and it encompasses everything we're about, all the different relationships that we mentor throughout the world. We pass this information from generation to generation, and also this information is how do we take care of our relations, the food, the regalia, and of our world. our spiritual well-being is the most important thing to the Karuk people. And to practice religion is something that has been handed down to and it's an inherent responsibility. So therefore, because of this place-based management, I feel that it is my responsibility and the tribal community's responsibility to reassert ourselves as the true stewards of this forest. This forest was given prescription by the great creator at the point of contact. And those are the things that we do, and that's how we're going to march into the future. It's a little bit more than just indigenous science. Now need Western science to sit there and share some of the burden as well. And this is kind of a finalized, the genetics of the river is living strong. That's my son off to the right, cooking salmon for one of the functions that we've had. And off to the left is my relations, the salmon. And it is very true. It's a cliche that we hear on the Klamath River a lot, but it's very true. It's the health of the river runs parallel with the health of the people. So thank you very much. And it's been a wonderful experience with Susan and Sibyl. Something will continue. And the importance is out of this world. Yotwa.
Thank you very, very much to our presenters for this long-term, collaborative, multidimensional work that they have been doing and sharing here with us. This is an incredible opportunity, for all of us, to learn from, how you presented, right? Decades of work that has been going into that. Where out of every month you would spend a week on these negotiations, and that are finally going to come to some fruition. Mm-hmm. So much gratitude for you to also make time to be here. We have a number of questions, and I'm going to do my best to pose them all. I'm going to take the first one. I'm going to pull two of the first questions together. So people were wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the salmon populations have recovered or not. And then in conjunction with that, about the importance of the first salmon ceremony.
Well, let me talk about the salmon populations, and I'll let Ron talk about the salmon ceremony if that works. The salmon populations have not recovered yet. They're going down every year. We have the Bureau of Reclamation manages the amount of water that comes from that lower dam that you saw is called Iron Gate Dam. And the Bureau of Reclamation manages the amount of water that's allowed to release out of there. Other water is used to keep the Klamath Lake at a certain level to protect endangered suckers for the Klamath tribes and also do diversions for agriculture. What that water is being managed to is at the minimum. The water is being managed so that the fish just get enough to survive. Surviving's not enough. When you have bad years in the ocean, when you have bad years, fish disease issues within the river, that's detrimental to the population. Salmon are meant to be able to survive those kind of catastrophes, but only every once in a while, every few years, not every single year. So what we're trying to do is manage these populations to harvestable levels so that people like Ron and his family can harvest not only for themselves, but for their elders, their community, for their ceremonies. So there's salmon to go around for everyone within the community and outside of the community that needs it, that's attached to these families. And we also have, so that's for fall Chinook. For coho salmon, right now, they're at pretty much an all-time low. We had 1,700 coho return to the Scott River, which is great, which is one of the tributaries to the Klamath, but they got stranded and almost all died instead of being able to spawn, and they were saved by a storm event. So we have a lot of water management issues within the basin that are detrimental to these things. The dam removal should help a lot for the main stem populations. And then next we'll need to go work on the tributaries. Ron, would you like to talk about the first salmon ceremony?
Yes, thank you, Susan. The first salmon ceremony, the management thereof, is very important to the species. The first salmon ceremony is for the spring salmon. And from my understanding, the medicine man receives word from the Yurok people downriver And the word comes all the way up to Amikiatum, right below Kutamine. And from that, on a certain point, on a certain lunar, on a certain month, every year, spring salmon ceremony occurred. And what that allowed for is the escapement up into the upper basin. Nowadays, we catch the first salmon coming into the river, and we don't have the first salmon ceremony. So what that does is that we start fishing the head of the run instead of the body of the run, because that's the traditional knowledge knows that you don't fish the head of the run, overfish the head of the run, or the tail of the run. You fish the body of the run. So that's, it gets more complex than that, but we have a limited amount of time today. But the main reason for the first salmon ceremony and the second salmon ceremony and the third salmon ceremony is for allow for escapement up in the upper basin.
Thank you so much, Ron. I have another question here. This is an incredible story. Thank you for sharing. What were the major challenges to merging Western and Indigenous science?
Ron, do you want me to start and then you jump in? Should we go like that?
Please do.
Okay. I think, one of the things is that when we talk about the co-production of knowledge, we often forget that there are a lot of power dynamics involved, and that all knowledge systems are not valued equally, and that the knowledge that's being produced is being discussed in a political process. And so the knowledge is political. And one of the things that's really difficult is that, some of the work that I use often, there's different ideas about how does Indigenous knowledge relate to Western science. And so there's not one way to think about it. Some of the work I use presents like a Venn diagram where there are distinct elements of knowledge systems, but yet also places of overlap. And so one of the things that is distinct is that, Indigenous knowledge systems are often bringing in a very holistic and spiritual component of knowledge that's often cut out of Western science, because that was what happened with the Enlightenment period, right? We cut the spiritual and the rational from one another. And so that is really a different kind of type and way of knowing that is, in this case, being brought into management decisions, but yet the political management structures, which are also colonial structures, aren't well placed to take in that perspective in many cases. And so there's the issue of, okay, what knowledge is being privileged, and then also who's at the table and who has the authority to take in and represent knowledge at the table in order to affect decision making. So that's very abstract. I'll pass it on to Ron if you want to add anything more concrete.
I think that's, the fact that, being at the table, that is the key element. I really, Susan is an amazing ally. And it's an ally for me as a tribal community member, and she's a tribal government member. She's able to understand that knowledge that comes from the dirt, the grassroots movement. And when I was there at the governmental table for 20 years, I represented Indigenous science, traditional ecological knowledge. I represented the voice of the people, the resources we call our relations, and the functions that make us whole. And now not being at that table is problematic. I hear a lot of things going on through the tribal government process that I'm not on that platform anymore that I totally disagree with. And it's not something that I can necessarily pinpoint and say, in this category, this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about being at the meetings at that table. And then I don't know how many times I've been at that meeting at the table and these things are being talked about. And when I get my epiphanies, if I'm not at the table, I don't get those epiphanies. So what we've done now, been really thankful to Sibyl and Kari Norgard and Susan and Jennifer Sauerwein and folks like that has really kind of kept me in the loop to be able to keep my voice present at the table, even though I'm no longer there. So this is a very optimistic looking process at the world today, because there we are finding a new way of performing and showing science as a whole rather than being compartmentalized.
Thank you so much. We're learning all from these very deep perspectives that you're sharing with us. I think we have time for two more questions. And one of them was, did any indigenous communities have access to the power generated by the hydroelectric dams? And if so, did this cause any conflict in the fight to stop the continued use of the dams?
I guess I can take that. So with these dams, they are a very interesting kind of case study because they do not provide the four that are being removed, the four lower. They do not provide for water storage, even though, like I said, they're the big bathtubs, they're relatively small. So they do not provide for water storage. There are no agricultural diversions out of them. They provide less than 2% of the power that was provided by PacifiCorp, which at the beginning, back when Ron started his meetings, that could have been replaced with just upgrading transmission lines. And in fact, that power has already been replaced at this point. And this amount of sediment that would be released from them is minimal. There's a tributary on the Klamath called the Trinity River, and the amount of sediment that it releases every year is the same as what's modeled to come when these dams remove. So to answer the question, no, there weren't really any concerns over replacing the power production for this. The company has already taken care of it at this point. And these dams really don't serve any purpose. They are old and antiquated, and they're causing way more problems than they're helping with. Ron, do you have anything else, or Sibyl?
Nope.
Susan, do you want to mention this fish ladder issue as well?
Oh, well, I guess when they were put in, there was no fish passage. The lowermost dam is 190 feet tall. So I think it would have to be 1.5 mile long fish ladder just to give over the first dam, much less the other three that have no fish passage. I think with the next one up is about 165 feet. So we have lots and lots of challenges. So even if there was fish passage put on these things, they would not be useful. Plus, you'd have to divert so much of the water to keep the fish passages running, the fish ladders running, that you would lose power production that way as well, which is one of the reasons that it became economically not feasible for PacifiCorp to keep the dams, is putting in those kind of mitigation measures made the cost not balance out at all.
Wow, that's really illuminating, enlightening. I want to be respectful of the time, and also that our presenters have been talking for close to an hour. And I apologize that we're not going to be able to get to all the questions. There are many good questions, but there's one that I think would make a good conclusion to this, fantastic session that we have here today. And if I may paraphrase, it's about how can this case study or the Karuk work be serving as a reference guide to other Pacific Northwestern tribes? How can we use this as guidance, or how can other tribes use this as guidance for positive outcomes for themselves? What do you see as a critical aspect?
Gosh, who wants to start? I can jump in, and then people can absorb that for a minute, because that's actually quite a big question. I'll just say that every tribe doesn't always have the same approach. Tribes are distinct cultures and distinct political bodies, and so there's not an assumption that this is a prescription for other tribes. So I just want to state that up front, and that also that the indigenous-led science is something we've really emphasized here in this context. I'll let others comment before the hour.
I would just like to reiterate that every tribe is its own sovereign nation. They're their own government. So people, like if you have researchers, I know a lot of you are academia, you can't come in and treat every tribe the same. You wouldn't treat the US the same as you would treat Germany, for example. So if people can wrap their head around that and get that kind of thing, that's part of the issue. But I think Sibyl has lots of great resources. And I think using tribes as colleagues, like if you can work with if tribal governments can work with other tribes, that's a very strong united front. Ron, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I kind of like, I guess I'm struggling with that a little bit, but the tribal government is one thing. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that it's a colonistic piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
So the tribal government has to adhere to the federal government's whims, and they can't follow strategies they would if they was totally inherent of their own well-being. So, but we have to rely on the federal government as our tribal trustee. So therefore, the tribal government is one thing. The tribal government can go out and do these things, but they have to be interconnected with the tribal community, because the tribal community predates tribal government. It predates colonialists. So in order to kind of like to wash the table clean, so to speak, and to start all over again with science to see what's best for everybody. It's not just, the patriarchal society that America has been based on. Now it's about climate change. Now it's about pandemics. Now it's about life-altering things. And the things that were passed down to me in an inherent responsible way is based on the well-being of the family. You take care of your babies, you take care of your elders, and everything else takes care of itself. So that's my job, is to take care of my elders and nurture them, get the information we need from them to move on to the future. But I also need to take a look at my children and their babies to make sure that they're well kept and well educated and in a place where they can be happy and where they can be well. And, so power, no. Education is power. Knowledge is power. And the more knowledge you have in both of these institutions we're talking about today, Indigenous science and Western science, there's a new way in this world today because of the pandemic, because of, the things that are happening, climate change. So our family, the things that have been passed down to me, I'm incorporating, and I'm doing really well. My kids are going to school, learning the things that they can come back and help me with our inherent responsibility. Without the work of Indigenous science and Western science, this doesn't happen. So this is a truly very important relationship that needs to be nurtured and taken to the tribal level at any tribe. Any tribe can jump in here and utilize the information that our tribe has developed to incorporate in their own bureaucratic process. So that's the importance of the way we work and the way we have Western science as a guideline, and then we just fill up that matrix with Indigenous science. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much again to our presenters. And I don't know if you've been able to follow the chat as well, but there are literally dozens of messages along the lines of, thank you so much, incredible presentation and such important work, variations of that. We very much appreciate you sharing your experience, your wisdom, and the incredible experience of collaboration and ultimately success, and the story of hope as well, in spite of everything that has happened in the past.